Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the official podcast of the Brock Press, where we take you beyond the headlines and do a deep dive into some of the many interesting articles written by our team this week. My name is Noah. I'm editor-in-chief of the Brock Press and host of the latest. I'm joined, as always, by Holly Morrison, our managing editor. And this week, we are also joined by one of our editors at large, Jonah Dayton. So, how are you both doing today?
Doing well. First time for me back in a while.
I'm doing pretty good. I had a fun bus adventure this morning, so we are late recording this podcast. But Noah and Jonah are very patient, even as I stupidly decide to go get groceries before recording a podcast and then miss a bus. But other than that, it's been a wonderful morning.
It's all good. We were ahead of the ball, and now we're back on time, so all's good. No worries. And yes, Jonah, it is nice to have you back again. It's been a while, but that's good. Good to have you. So this week was another big one in the news. In Ontario here, we are in full pre-election mode, and so the province has started to reopen and remove more and more COVID mandates and rules and restrictions, and they seem dead set on getting all of those gone and out of the way before the election. Also, the invasion of Ukraine has continued, and we felt an admittedly very, very small effect of that here at the gas pumps lately. And lastly, but not least, Holly wrote about athletes, professional athletes, and the importance of remembering that they are employees and workers first, and celebrities and professional athletes second. And yeah, we're going to talk about all three of those. So without further ado, let's get right into it.
So the first pair of articles that we're going to talk about, sort of the same theme about a return to normal. One was written by our news editor, Chad Ellis, as well as Devani Shaw, another news editor. And Chad wrote about how things are reopening rather quickly. COVID restrictions are falling by the wayside. Public health is still very much encouraging people to stay vigilant and for businesses to do their part as well. While Devani wrote about the petition going around from Brock nursing grads who are frustrated by the school's decision to cancel their pinning ceremony again this year, despite restrictions being lifted. So just quickly wanted to get your thoughts on not just reopening to the unvaccinated, but also the upcoming removal of mask mandates and physical distancing and whatnot. What do you think about the timing, about the haste that this is all of a sudden happening at, and do you think better late than never?
It is definitely politically motivated. And I think that's pretty plain to see to just about anyone. Not to say that I don't really personally care about the things that they're changing, really, for the most part. There's a few things. But I've been vaccinated, and 90% of the country has been vaccinated. So I mean, the vast majority of us, even the I'd say close to the majority of people who were hesitant or skeptical originally, have done their part and got the shot. I do understand that vaccine requirements to enter places couldn't really last forever. I don't think they necessarily should have to. But in terms of that change, that doesn't really affect me. The masks have never really bothered me personally. I'm probably going to keep using them personally, save for the only place I think it's kind of irrelevant and kind of silly is at restaurants, just because if you're going to a restaurant, you're going to have to take it off to eat anyways. So why are you wearing it for the 5 seconds you walk from the entrance to your seat, or the minute or two you go to the washroom and back? It seems kind of silly, but other places I think it makes sense to keep using it, so I probably still will, at least for the time being. And then really the only thing that I kind of am happy about is distancing, just because that's been kind of limited capacity of the only thing that's been left closed, right? Like big events, concerts and things like that. So to have that going away is good. And really I just kind of want consistency is the big thing for me. So even if it's politically motivated to keep this, to get this stuff out, the big thing for me is if after the election or even in the lead up to the election, things have to go back again, would be really demoralizing and terrible. But if the situation requires it, I guess, it is what it is. But, I really hope that this, in their political motivation to get things open, that, there was still a consideration of that possibility of the having to rebound again for the fourth or fifth time. And that would just really be terrible in my opinion. But yeah, most of the stuff doesn't bother me. Most of it doesn't really affect me. But the things that are coming, I think, are good. I just am hopeful that, definitely hopeful that things can stay on a positive trajectory.
Yeah, I think I guess a little bit of same here. There's a lot of it that doesn't really super affect me. I'm vaccinated. I got my booster. I still wear a mask most places and probably still will. I guess just sort of the disorganization of it is what gives me pause and a little bit of concern. It did happen quite suddenly, and a lot of people in places don't quite know what the rules are still, what's going on, what the rules are in certain industries, who can do what, who can do where. And I know that I've beat this drum a whole bunch, but I'm still quite concerned for people who maybe have autoimmune disorders or, are immunocompromised, how that kind of thing will affect them. Obviously, like you said, the vaccine mandates just to enter public buildings, that wasn't going to stay around forever. But removing mask mandates, I think, especially in crowded, large settings, I think that might be a little bit, that gives me pause, I think, because then what you're doing is sort of excluding people with disabilities from, public life and being out in public. So, mask mandates, or even just the general social, not necessarily pressure, but social expectation that you wear a mask when you're inside. That is something that I'd like to see at least stick around for a little bit longer.
Yeah, similar to you guys, I got all three shots and feel like, given my age, I'm pretty low risk. Also, like you guys, wearing a mask is not that much of a burden. It's pretty easy. So I think it's not that hard. If a store or whatever wants to keep a mask policy on, I'll abide. It's pretty easy. It's not that intrusive. And no, the restaurant thing you were so right about. That made no sense. Where you got to put it on while you walk to your table, sit down, and then take it off, and then get up and put it back on to pay the check or whatever. That never made sense. But I think, we saw a few summers ago, actually, I think both summers of the pandemic, it was pretty nonchalant because cases were low, the weather was nice. And now that we're getting into the warmer months, I think that also will sort of help, I guess, feel like everything will go back to normal, which sort of leads me into the second question. I know that we've all been way off making predictions before. I think once the NBA got canceled, or not canceled, but shut down indefinitely the first time in March 2020, I wrote in sidelines probably it'll be a 3 to 4 week thing, and then we'll be back good as new. So that was way off. But just for the sake of predicting, let's try again. What do you think things will look like in 12 months from now, as far as health restrictions and mandates are concerned?
I think, like you said, the one thing I've learned is that I have absolutely no idea. So, I don't think I could even, guess. I don't think my brain could conceptualize what 12 months from now looks like, because the way that I have been functioning, just for, the past year or so is just, I'm not going to expect anything more than, 6 hours before it happens. Very much taking things, a week at a time, figuring out how things are going at any particular time rather than, trying to predict ahead. So I don't think that I even have the brain capability to think about what will happen in 12 months.
Well, that was a very diplomatic and sports coach answer right there, giving a long, eloquent answer without really answering the question. That was well played.
Thank you. I've learned from the best.
allow me to do the same thing. Because that question, even though I know I kind of formed it in our outline of things, but it just kind of makes me shudder to even think of answering it. But like, if I had to guess, I mean, based on recent experience, I'm assuming we'll be coming out of some type of restriction next year. Like, I have no reason to believe that won't be the case. I'd love to be proven wrong, but like, I mean, everything just seems to show that. Like, yeah, 2 years ago, that first summer, like you said, cases were like near zero across Niagara. So it's like, and it came back with a vengeance, right? And then this last year came back like crazy too with another, with the last variant. So I mean, I personally have every reason to believe it'll be another disaster next winter. But I mean, I really hope I'm proven wrong. I really, really hope that.
Yeah, I think summers typically are okay, and then the winter it gets worse, probably because of cold weather and holidays and traveling. But yeah, I guess I'll complete the trilogy and not really make a prediction because I have no idea. So just wrapping up with Devani's bit here about the nursing grads. Given that things are going back to normal, do you guys think that the nursing students have a point to be made here? Should things be going back in person, such as this ceremony, as a way of sort of recognizing the past 2 years and all the sacrifices that have been made?
I think, like, especially if because they have been going to classes in person and they have been going to their placements in person, it doesn't super make a whole lot of sense to me that, their celebration and ceremonies, that there's no reason for that to be in person. Because I know, like, the whole thing has been, like, minimizing unnecessary in-person things. But even with that, like, we're back to doing sort of quote-unquote unnecessary in-person things. So, yeah, I do think that, like, they absolutely have a point. There is a point to be made that, like, I can't think of a good reason why things shouldn't be in person, but that, would apply to classes and, placements. So yeah, I think with the way that things are, I think they're absolutely entitled to at least, ask for that.
Yeah, I think there's an argument to be made for the necessity, or whatever you want to call it, of something like this. This graduation pinning ceremony that they do. I think there's a necessity to that when the conditions allow, like they do right now. Because I do think it's important to recognize sacrifice of people, especially people entering, who have been working as nurses in their placement, not as registered nurses, but doing the work for free, mind you, as well, during such a difficult time, and also now entering the working world as, having been qualified and passing what is a very difficult program, and entering a workplace that's kind of been on fire for the last 2 years and really been in a state of crisis. So, yeah, I think there's a necessity in recognizing that sacrifice they made. I do think they have a point to be made here, and the conditions allow for something like that to happen. I think they should, be allowed to do that, to have that ceremony go on in person as it's supposed to. For the next article, we're actually going to talk about one of mine, my one that I wrote this week, my editorial. I shared some thoughts on the price of gas and how absurdly high it is, but why that is, and why I think it's important to consider the global context when we're trying to place blame on the whole gas price situation. And really, from there, I just kind of go into, urging people to resist the talk about, getting rid of the carbon tax and increasing domestic production of oil and gas, because I think it kind of it misses the point of that climate action, that has been going on and what it needs to increase, and kind of misses the point of this situation that it shouldn't be about getting back to our decaying normal that we've been trying to escape from as quickly as possible. It should really be almost an accelerationist point in time to keep moving things forward in a more environmentally conscious direction. But that is just my thoughts, and I will ask you all your thoughts on that in a moment. But to start, I'm curious, what are some of the highest gas prices you've seen locally? Because I've seen some pretty ridiculous numbers lately. So I'm just curious if you have anything more ridiculous than the 180s I've been seeing.
I was going to say, for me, it was 179.9. So pretty much right under 180.
Yeah, like obviously, like I don't drive, which I've said before, but like I've definitely seen like 180, getting up to like 182. I was with a friend who does drive, like in her car, and like we drove a little bit to find cheaper gas for like 175, which like that's not cheap gas in the grand scheme of things, but like it was in the context of like how expensive gas is right now.
It's kind of insane, especially when you think about when the pandemic started, almost this time to the week, 2 years ago, gas plummeted. It may have been more like April and May, but I mean, I remember it being like, what was it, like 60 cents or something ridiculous? Like, so to have that triple from like the highest price to the lowest price in 2 years is just absolutely insane. Especially we've lived through such a ridiculous and tumultuous time in like world history and world events. So then I'm curious, especially, well, Jonah, you don't drive either, right?
I mean, I do drive. I just don't have a car, so I mooch off my mom's car.
Right. Me too. Guilty as charged, but I also live at home, so I drive it more, I would assume.
Like I'm in St. Catharines. I don't have a car, no. So I really like this does not affect me very much at all.
Right. So then I think all three of us will have different takes on this to some degree. How important or not important do you see getting gas prices down as being? How important of that issue do you think that is? And do you think the government has a role to play in getting prices under control at a time like this?
I would say it's definitely, again, like Holly and I don't drive, so for us it probably doesn't affect us that much. But I do think like if there were ever a time for like gas prices to be absurdly high, it's nice to have it coincide with like this whole work from home thing where like before, if you're having to drive to and from work, 5 days a week, and sometimes like my dad had a job that was in like Mississauga, and so he was like on the road for like 2 hours a day. So that was always like it's lucky that now most people, I guess, are able to sort of work from home, or maybe they're only driving in once a week, twice a week. So I think this could have been like disastrous like 5 years ago when people were like driving everywhere all the time. So I guess that would be the silver lining in all of this. And I would think getting them, I mean, they're never going to go down to whatever you said it was like 2 years ago, which was like 70 or something crazy. But getting them down to just so you're not like rubbing your forehead in angst as you're like pulling the gas trigger is probably a good move.
Yeah, I'm like of, I guess, two minds about the whole thing because obviously, like you said, scrapping stuff like the carbon tax, and like climate, change initiatives, like that's not a great thing. But also, like I think that like the people that like expensive gas prices hurt the most, like they're not really the people in society with a whole lot of power. Like it's gas prices being high, it doesn't affect like the super wealthy as much as it affects just like regular people. So I guess like for that reason, I think that like there is something to be done. If it's just some kind of even like tax credit or something. Like I don't, know how that would work logistically and feasibly, but like I don't know, it's crazy seeing how much people are spending on gas.
Yeah, even as like I tried to thread that needle in my article because like I'm definitely not an idealist person, I understand the urgency and like the reality that, like you said, it's affecting normal people, and that there is certainly a role for government to play, even if it's purely out of selfish desire to, keep people happy enough to vote them in again, in June there. But like, I get the need to address gas prices, but it's definitely being like co-opted by people who were trying to sell like the carbon tax thing, 2 years ago, like when Doug Ford put those stickers on the gas, like forced the gas stations to have those stickers on the pumps to tell people that prices would go up because of the carbon tax. Like, it's all that type of messaging from 2 years ago is now coming back to be like, see, we need to get rid of this stuff because of gas prices. But like, that definitely ignores why prices have gone up so much. Like, obviously it's because of the instability of all these sanctions and whatnot with Russia, and even more stuff now is coming because the U.S. is, not that they necessarily import tons from Russia, but they're going to be cutting their imports of oil and gas, so even more directly influencing it and affecting their oil and gas supply, which is going to just make prices worse, which I think people would say is justified at the moment, but it's, the longer that sticks around, the more harm you might be doing to, these types of efforts to rein in climate change and to make electric cars more affordable and to, invest in making cities more friendly to walking traffic and to pedestrians and for public transit as well. I think it only does a disservice to those things to leave this issue going on longer and longer, because you just kind of add fuel to that argument that it's because of carbon tax and because of we don't produce locally and domestically and all that stuff. So this question might be a little complicated. I'm going to try to go at it a different way, make it a little more direct. But I'm curious if you guys got this angle that I was trying to talk about in my piece, because I think it's clear that oil and gas has, we know the climate impacts of it, but there's also a security angle. And I think we've kind of proven that here with the Russian situation. So I'm just curious if either of you have any thoughts, pertaining to that, right? Like, is there more arguments than just the climate for getting off of fossil fuels or trying to reduce our use of fossil fuels as much as we possibly can?
I think like the main argument is always going to be, for the sake of climate, and also just like for the sake of the fact that fossil fuels are not renewable. We're gonna run out. We have to figure out what to do when they run out. So I think that is always going to be the main argument. But yeah, I definitely like see the angle that you were going for with just like the idea that like if you sanction a country that you get most of your oil from, well, now you're kind of screwed with, oil. So I think that definitely makes sense. I think the idea of like importing from more ethical countries, I don't think there's such a thing as an ethical country, especially when they are exporting oil. So I don't think that's really something that like I can super get behind. I guess even just like the idea of importing from countries that you have like a working trade relationship with would be, I guess, one way to do it. But I definitely think like the like long-term goal should be reducing the use of it as much as possible.
Yeah, you ever see those huge like 18-wheeler trucks when they're at a red light, and then as soon as the green light turns and they go, and there's just like a cloud of like thick smoke that you just can see hanging in the air forever? It's just always like, I'm not the most like green person, but every time I see like a hanging cloud of smoke that like stays there for minutes, I'm always just like, ugh, we should probably do something about these fossil fuels. So yeah, it's a good point you made, Holly, about like the least work country sort of thing, because you're probably gonna be hard pressed to find like a fantastic place to get oil from. But until like Teslas are available for everyone, what choice do we have, right? And it's I think also with people like us probably buying cars that are used, that are decades old, that are not as fuel efficient. That also probably doesn't help this whole fossil fuel thing.
Yeah, and what I'm was trying to get at is just that taking that onus off the individual, right? Because I understand that at this current time, Teslas are too expensive. They're definitely too expensive for me, or any other electric car for that matter, or any new car for that matter. But that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that I personally think the government should be involved in making those things cheaper, right? If there's subsidy to go around, and we're either choosing to, spend millions to get the price of gas down like 5 cents or something, and having the government foot the bill for that, or continuing to invest in research and development to improve and cheapen the technology behind green vehicles and green transport, public transport and other things. I'd rather we be doing that, or even producing it here in Canada, starting increasing manufacturing of those things. I think that's, if you're talking from a government scale, I think that's a good thing that should be kind of prioritized. I get the immediate need to work, with what people have, which is, gas, powered vehicles. Like I get that. I hope we could think bigger, but I know I'm not that idealistic either, or optimistic that that's possible. I know that it kind of boils down to what the moment calls for, but I hope this doesn't fall completely on, this moment doesn't fall completely on deaf ears when it comes to governments and politicians. I really do hope that it serves as somewhat of a waking up point, just to realize that, even beyond the climate, there's risks posed, as, like Holly, you said, as, oil and gas becomes more finite, more and more difficult to obtain, and as it gets more expensive, either artificially or, through that scarcity issue, that, you're going to face more and more issues. There's going to be more pressure to work with bad actors. There'll be more pressure to cave to the interests of countries like Russia, to give them what they want in order to secure your supply. So I really do hope that this is not, doesn't just turn into a subsidy for, gas station, gas companies to give you, 5 cents off gas until this thing blows over. I really hope it is a bigger deal than that, but I can dream, I guess.
Okay, so our final topic, we're going to talk about one of the opinions that I wrote this week. I decided that I wanted to write a little bit about professional athletes, and I guess the intersection between professional athletes and labor, viewing professional athletes as laborers and workers. So I guess I sort of pointed out that most of them are not insanely massively wealthy. And so to frame any kind of like ongoing labor dispute or negotiation between athletes and ownership of teams, as like, millionaires fighting with billionaires, and that athletes should be grateful for the opportunities to be a professional athlete, that doesn't really help matters, that doesn't really accomplish much, and it only really helps the billionaire team owners, especially, when it's time for collective bargaining agreements, and other kind of negotiations, even things just like as simple as like one guy's contract. So I guess I wanted to talk to you, Jonah, especially, because you've written about the MLB lockout. You wrote about that for your feature. I'm not a big MLB person, but I've certainly, been paying attention. So I guess I just wanted to get your thoughts on the lockout and what's going on?
Yeah, so I am a big MLB fan and someone who's followed this lockout very closely. Like you said, I wrote a big piece about it. That was about 3 weeks ago, and so a lot has changed since. And my, I guess, quick hitting thought is that this lockout, and I feel like the media has been doing a better job covering this one. I mean, I wasn't around for the last one, but just based on what I've read, it seems like they're doing a better job sort of illustrating the fact that this is 100% on the owners. This is, the players are asking for so little in relativity that the fact that we're missing games and spring training still hasn't started and free agency is frozen, it is 100% on the owners. And even if the owners were to accept the players' current offer, it would still be a huge win for the owners. But it's not like a blowout, completely wall-to-wall domination win, and they're not going to accept anything less. The players are just asking to be. The players right now are asking, can we just not get screwed as much as last time? And the owners are like, no. So as much as I want baseball to come back and this lockout to be over, I do not put any of the onus on the players. It's entirely on the owners. And the whole millionaire billionaire thing, I saw a very good tweet that I am unfortunately not remembering who wrote it, but it basically said a million seconds ago is February of this year, and a billion seconds ago is 1990. That's how big of a difference we're talking about. And I know this is the next point here in our outline that we'll get to, and you do a good job in your piece, Holly. But it is, I think, important to just, even if you're someone like Noah, who's not really a big sports fan, who might not be following this and just thinking, why can't they agree? I do think it's important for everybody to understand that these employees, it's a super, super unique working climate, and the stuff that they, I guess, have to deal with is unlike any other profession. And oftentimes, they're playing for, not only for themselves, but they're playing for generations to come, and they have a very, very finite window to do so.
Yeah, there really is, that is one of the things that I talked about in the piece. There's no other job where the contracts and the working conditions are similar. I think the phrase that I used in the piece was McDonald's does not trade cashiers with Wendy's. No matter how good the cashier is, there's this understanding that the specific set of skills that you have as a professional athlete sort of warrants a different kind of working environment. And I think for them to ask for that working environment to be a little bit better, which is really all they're asking for, I think that's incredibly reasonable, and to not give that to them is kind of crazy. One of the other things that I talked about in the piece was there's this sort of story coming out of the WNBA, which is women's basketball, where the New York Liberty got fined $500,000 for providing chartered flights for the players. And I guess league policy is that all the teams have to fly commercially and use the flights that the league provides for them, which is just absolutely bonkers and crazy considering that they're professional athletes. And then just the idea that ownership will then frame them as greedy and selfish for wanting better working conditions. And I don't think that is something that's sort of unreasonable to ask. And you're talking about the way that being a professional athlete is different. There are things that are different about being a professional athlete. So for me, having to fly commercially for my job, that's not a big deal. For a basketball player though, who is almost 7 feet tall, that is a big deal. So I guess it's just sort of important to understand that there are different circumstances and they have different needs, and to ask your boss to accommodate your different needs is entirely reasonable, I think.
Yeah, and especially, I once ran into the women's basketball team at Syracuse University at the Buffalo airport, and they were in line just like everybody else was, and they were taller than everybody else was, and I feel when I go on a plane, I'm already oh my god, I have no leg room, so I can't even imagine someone who's a foot taller than me, having to cram into that coach seat.
Yeah, and like there are like other players who will like pay out of pocket to like, you know, upgrade their seats. And that's not something that they should have to do because it's like it's their part of their job to fly there. It's they're not doing this for fun. It's part of their job. And that is another thing that I talked about in the piece is like we just like societally and like verbally it's you play sports, you don't work sports. Like you don't it's hard to view it as like a job, like an office job. In everyone's head like it's fun and it should be like an honor to be a professional athlete, but it is still very much a job, um, and you can't. It's a different kind of working environment, and so you have to treat it differently. It's super easy to be like, oh my god. Even I saw it with like the WNBA, them being like, well, these players make like upwards of $200,000 a year, and while that's not as much as like men's sports, it's way more than like the average American earns. But also then remembering that the average American can earn money for, a lot longer than a professional athlete can. They didn't spend their entire adolescence sort of essentially, doing unpaid training to get that job. So it's a different, I guess, no pun intended, kind of different ball game when it comes to professional athletes and, the way that their working cycles go.
Yeah, and this is the thing, especially with baseball, is that more so than any other sport, it takes forever to actually like earn money in baseball. And a lot like this is a very common scenario where a player will get drafted out of high school. If they are a high pick, they'll get a hefty bonus that is supposed to last for quite a while. But if they're not, the bonus is really it's going to last a few years maybe, and that's depending if you're a fifth round pick or a super late round pick, it's almost nothing. So unless you're like a top pick, you could be drafted out of high school or signed out of, if you're an international player, you could be signed out of, Dominican, Cuba, wherever you're from at like 16, right? And then you're spending, 6 years in the minors where you're making like literal pennies. Oftentimes, if you're an international player, you don't speak the language. Injuries are always a risk. Performance is always a risk. Like if if you flame out, you don't have a degree to fall back on. Oftentimes, also, if you're an international player, there's a lot of pressure on you to like provide for your family back home. And even if you do make it, the rare few who do, they'll get called up, early 20s. Well, then they're not a free agent until they have 6 years of service time. So sometimes these guys are getting their first crack at real money at like 29, 30, right? And the players who make it to 30, like, yes, they get paid incredible amounts of money, sometimes like 9-figure deals, but it is so rare for people to actually make it that far. And a vast majority of players won't even make it the 3 years needed for arbitration. So I think that's why like a big sticking point for the MLBPA this time around is just increasing the minimum salary. And that's going to do, assuming MLB, eventually meets them halfway, that'll just do wonders for a vast majority of players who the league is sort of manipulating.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's important to frame because like the millionaires versus billionaires thing, that's a thing that people say a lot of the time. And like even if it was millionaires versus billionaires, I am on the millionaire side because the billionaires are the ones exploiting them. But even so, it's the players that like and like your favorite players who make a lot of money, they're not like typically they are not doing this for themselves. Like it's a big thing with sort of the MLB situation that like they're doing this for minor league players. They're doing this for the next guys who sort of come up. And I think that's an important distinction to make because in that case, it's not really millionaires versus billionaires. It's regular people who have a job where they might make slightly more than a normal person, but also will have to retire when they're like 36. So I think that's just an important distinction to make, that it's not really millionaires versus billionaires.
Allow me to give my uneducated take. It was good listening to you guys because I like that you're passionate about this stuff and know about it. I certainly don't, and I'm certainly not passionate about it, which is kind of my issue because I can get behind standing with workers over bosses, absolutely. And so, just on principle, I agree, Holly. I certainly would. I am in favor of, supporting the athletes. There's just so many, workers' struggles that I personally feel are way more important that take precedence in my mind as a non-sports person. And I don't necessarily think I'm alone in that. I agree that the people who are like they're being greedy and who are essentially just like doing the dirty work for the owners of these teams is just, I mean, pretty embarrassing and pretty ignorant. But I mean, look, yeah, ideally they could make enough to have lived off of their sports careers for the rest of their life. But like, if you have to leave a job in your 30s, you're perfectly capable of doing normal non-sports work for another 20 years, as the rest of society does. If it didn't provide for you up into your 80s, like I get they should be treated fairly in the moment and stuff, but I mean the talk of like giving them enough to provide for the rest of their, I mean it's totally out of step with like the rest of the working world that I just can't really give too, like it just doesn't matter to me much to fight for that stuff. But that's just me as like a general labor person who's certainly happy to give my, lend my support to athletes over owners, absolutely. But it's just in terms of my priority list of kind of working people, which I know, we really shouldn't be parsing them out, but hey, that's the reality. We do. Their struggle to me is a lower personal priority of just something to be passionate or personally be invested in, or you know what I mean. But that's me, my ignorant sports take.
Yeah, I think that's fair, especially for someone who like doesn't, do sports. I think like my article is definitely like targeted as like at like sports fans, mostly just being like, hey, stop calling people greedy for asking for what they deserve. And I think I guess like the only thing that I take issue with is the idea that like their careers shouldn't provide for them for the rest of their lives. I do really think it should, because when you ask someone to be a professional athlete, you're asking them to basically give you like their body for the rest of their life, because like players get injured so much. Players, like, even if a player like is not injury prone and doesn't get injured, being a professional athlete is not good for you. It is not good for your body. It like can shorten your lifespan even. So I think, and then combine that with the idea that like their labor creates so much value, I think for them to like ask for that is, I think, incredibly valid. Just like I think it's valid for every single, worker to ask for the value of their labor, that they be compensated for that. So I think like that's the only thing that you said that I don't necessarily agree with. But I think for like average people, like, yeah, this isn't something that you really have to care about. Jonah and I are like sports management majors, so like obviously this is the labor stuff that we're going to be banging on about.
Yeah, and you are right. Of course, they're sacrificing their bodies, but again, I don't want to keep walking, or talking in circles. But like, and then this isn't to be some type of pity party. It's just a personal example that I know of, that like my one of my grandparents, or one of my grandfathers, he worked in automotive manufacturing his whole life, or his whole adult life. My dad, still currently is working there. And I mean, just the physical toll of that. And again, I'm not saying because they don't have it, others shouldn't. But I just, when I'm talking about, or when I'm thinking of personal priority of, workers deserving of better treatment, I'm not losing sleep for athletes before, say, like people in manufacturing, people in minimum wage jobs who, their job does not working 20 years does not provide for them the rest of their life. They have to work into their 50s and 60s or even longer, especially now, right? With even less promise of retirements and pensions. So, but like you said, as a non-sports person, it does make sense, the difference. And as I also already said, I do definitely support the athletes above the owners. It's just, yeah. We've said it. We don't need to reiterate unless there's new points to be said.
And also, like,
No
the
new
one thing
point.
that, like, it usually come back to for me is, like, women's sports. Like, they don't make enough. They don't make as much as, like, somebody who's working a regular full-time job. So I think just advocating for that kind of labor, that also is, like, a different thing for me. But anyway, Jonah, I just kind of cut you off.
No, I was just going to say, I think, like, I don't know if we want to end off here, but, like, pretty much I think the lesson to be learned here is that, Noah, your article from a few years ago about why being a billionaire is unethical has aged beautifully.
Yeah, whether they're in, that's one thing that doesn't change. Whatever the industry, being a billionaire comes at the cost of, the labor of others, undoubtedly, unavoidably. And that does it for another episode of The Latest. Thank you, Holly and Jonah, for joining me to talk about these great articles. Thanks for our spirited or not so spirited debate or agreement, but different sides of the same coin on sports. And thanks for teaching me a few things about athletes and their struggles. I appreciate it. And thanks for talking about all the rest of it, too. We had a great conversation about all these fantastic articles this week. But they are not the end. That is not the extent of the articles from this week. We have a lot of great ones, all on the website, www.brockpress.com. You'll find them all there. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And we share those articles there as well throughout the week. On top of following us on social media, be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You'll find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Anchor, and more and more and more. Just be sure to look up The Latest, the Brock Press Podcast, wherever you listen to your podcast, and you should find us with no issues. You'll also find the podcast on our website and on our YouTube channel. With all that said, thanks again for listening, and we will see you next time for another episode.